Hey, quick question. What do these jobs have in common? Accountant, carpenter, beautician, electrician, photographer, graphic artist, interior designer, choreographer, writer, chef, seamstress. They all work in the Oklahoma film industry. And there's a place for you to join the action. Learn more about starting your film career in Oklahoma by visiting okfilmmusic.org/getting started.
Well, welcome everyone. I am Joe Chianese. I'm going to be your moderator this afternoon, or whenever you're viewing this. And welcome to Senate Bill 608, setting the stage for new growth and development in Oklahoma. I think Tava is probably going to be the only person who appreciates what I'm going to say right now, but she and I have done many panels together, and I think once or twice before we used to refer to Oklahoma as a little state that could, and now I can say that it is now the little state that can and is doing. For a long time now, Oklahoma has been sort of on the top of everyone's minds in terms of being a production hub for film and television. But thanks to, well, let me backtrack a bit. I mean, because going back to 2018, actually when I met with a few folks, including Tava when they came to Los Angeles, including Senator Roger Thompson and Representative Dunnington, including others like Representative Wallace, they were very instrumental in doubling the funding in 2019 from 4 million to 8 million. So now we've even got a bigger change thanks to Senator Hall and Representative Petgatter, who I'll introduce a little bit later, but we've now got a lot more money in Oklahoma and a lot more to talk about. So I'm really excited to get started. We've got a large group here this morning. So let me introduce the panelists. And again, what we're going to be focusing on is not only the new legislation and what it's going to mean with regards to future growth within the state, and that includes infrastructure and workforce, but also talk about the overall economic impact. So to begin, I'm going to introduce Tava Malloy-Sovsky, who's the director of the Oklahoma Film and Music Office. We have along with her Secretary Scott Mueller, who is the Secretary of Commerce and Workforce Development. As I mentioned earlier, we've got Representative Scott Fettgecker, who also serves as the House Appropriations and Budget Subcommittee and Finance, Revenue, and Taxation Chair Representative and one of the co-authors of the bill. In addition, we've got Senator Chuck Hall, Senate Appropriations Vice Chair, again, instrumental in drafting and supporting the bill. In addition, we've got film producer and co-founder, along with his partner, John Irwin, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, Kevin Downs, and their company is Kingdom Story Company. And we're going to hear a lot about the projects that they have and are shooting in Oklahoma. And last but not least, we've got Chris Freihoffer, who is an Oklahoma-based casting director. He's also a local filmmaker and a longtime friend and supporter of the Oklahoma Film and Music Office. So I'm really excited to get started. And I think the best way to get started, I really want to start with you, Secretary Mueller. One of the things that I learned is that in addition to the new Senate bill, the Oklahoma Film Office, Film and Music Office moved to be part of the Oklahoma Department of Commerce. So what does the future of the Film Office look like under Commerce, and what additional resources will flow through the commission to help expand the industry?
You bet. Thanks, Joe, very much. So it's an important milestone in my view for both the Office of Film and Music as well as the Department of Commerce in the state of Oklahoma. And I think it's a recognition of the role that I view as an increased role that both film and music and their industries and their associated workforces can play in diversifying Oklahoma's economy on a going forward basis. And I think there's a strong view from everyone in the leadership of the state that diversifying Oklahoma's economy is an important and among the most important initiatives for the state in the decade or two to come. And I've got a view that with the progress made here, and the credit for that goes to the people you just mentioned, the film and music industries will play a very meaningful role in that diversification as we go forward. And I think we'll talk some more about it as we go on, but it's not just the productions themselves and the people directly hired, but what I call a multiplier effect on the impact that they have on local businesses who benefit when folks come to town and earn money in Oklahoma, whether that's restaurants and caterers and hotels and other service providers. And then really an expansion of opportunities for Oklahoma's workforce as well. And I know we'll speak some more about how some of the training and workforce institutions plan to line up and allocate incremental resources around that. So there's a fair budget inside the Department of Commerce for economic development and for workforce development. And I think by making this move, the Office of Film and Music will benefit from both of those. And again, it's a priority for the Department of Commerce and for our state.
I really appreciate you mentioning the multiplier effect, because a lot of times that gets ignored. I lived in the world of incentives, both in the U.S. and around the world. And a lot of times when there are incentives or even discussion of incentives, everyone's sort of looking sort of direct apples to apples, and you sometimes miss that multiplier. And again, it affects, as you said, tourism, hospitality industry, real estate. It really is across so many lines. So I'm glad you mentioned that, and we'll talk more about it. As I mentioned, I think Tava mentioned, I've been working with the Oklahoma Film Commission for quite a while, probably over 10 years now, working with Tava's predecessor, Jill Simpson. And again, it may have sounded like a joke, but it wasn't when I said Oklahoma was a little state that could, is that it really always was sort of a darling for independent film producers, and it really always attracted those independent films. I wanted to give Tava a chance to talk about sort of the history and the progress of not only the incentive program, but the growth of crew and infrastructure in the state over the years, and even talk about some of the projects that have come to the state prior to 2020, because I want to leave 2020 and 2021 as a bit of a surprise towards the middle of the end of the panel. So Tava, give us a bit more of a perspective.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And yeah, we've been joking about the little state that could for so long, but I think it's, you sort of do have to look back at where the program started. And we had our very first film incentive that launched in 2001, so 20 years ago. And it's interesting because at the time, Canada was like one of the main places that had incentives. So the title of our then film bill was called Compete with Canada Act. So that has run its course. It served a great purpose. It allowed, everyone before our time to really like start rooting this industry. And as you say, we've been this independent hub for many, many years. And we'll talk about some of the success movies that have come through Oklahoma. But that program renewed itself in 2014, which happened to be the year that I came into place. But thanks to Jill Simpson, my predecessor, and everyone that worked on that piece of legislation. It had a lower cap at the time of $5 million, but the best thing about it was that it had a 10-year renewal program. And that sends messages, as you know, Secretary Mueller, here in state, it says, and Chris, it says, oh, I can buy instead of rent, or I can put my kids in this school, or I could buy this house or whatever. It really sends that message in state of certainty. Oh, the state is supporting this for 10 years. And then out of state, same thing. Businesses want certainty. The studios, the producers, Kevin, they want certainty knowing they can come here. It was designed, again, to create that certainty and longevity, but we really were wanting some television on top of all the independent films, but the cap at the time was, again, too small. So what has happened over the years, in the past 7 years, is we took a dip. One year we had the program annual cap went from 5 to 4, but to your point, Joe, earlier we were talking about due to private sector, and we'll talk a lot about private sector stepped in 2017 and 18 and said, Tava, can I bring my state representatives and legislators to Georgia to see their infrastructure, to see what we're missing, right? Can we go to Los Angeles? So we traveled alongside, we linked up, lots and lots of hours and time spent in those spaces so that our state leadership could really see our potential, because you don't know what a soundstage is until you walk into one, honestly. And we've definitely done a lot of educating in that space, but it really wasn't until those prime couple of years where people were seeing the infrastructure and the Georgia Film Academy's success and pumping out and training new crew. And then I have to give a big nod to Kingdom Story, Kevin Downs in 2018, when I Can Only Imagine came out. Our legislators went to that premiere and they had never seen anything like that. Representative Randy McDaniel ran back to the Capitol that night to deem that song. He was so proud of that movie, deem that song our state's inspirational song. So there's a lot of synergy here on this panel. And that gave us so much mileage. Thank you, Kevin, and your team. And it just culminated in the past couple of years to where Senator Thompson and Dunnington and those in 2019 were able to get that cap from 4 to 8. Boy, at the time, it sure seemed like a lot. What's happened since then is we were successful in using 8 years of $8 million, $64 million in a 2-year span, less than 2 years. That includes the ability that we have now to host the biggest movie that's ever been made, Killers of the Flower Moon, which is filming here in the state as at the time of this recording. We're very proud to have them here. But so that's the good news. And then the challenge, and it's not bad news, right? The challenge is that our focus redirected during this pandemic to new sound stages that we're going to talk about, Prairie Surf Media and Green Pastures, some new sound stages popping up, and some other companies like Castle Rose Studios that have been here for years. And I've never seen anything like it. The magic of the private sector, the industry, and their lobbyists coming together to the Capitol and really helping us educate our state legislators was really what moved the needle to bring us to where we are today, to have this new Filmed in Oklahoma Act. Some of the successes, and then I'll turn it back, Joe, to you, is just some of the successes over the years. August Osage County brought a lot of economic business into our state's economy. We had several Sundance Darling movies that won a lot of awards, like Wildlife and To the Stars and Wild Indian, and most recently Minari.
What was the William H. Macy project? I forgot.
Oh, the Rudderless,
right?
Yeah, and they really utilized the music incentive along with the film incentive. So, the list goes on. As far as
even American Gods, you had American Gods there. American Gods,
and Marvelous Miss Maisel. So those like a few days of each of those massive TV series. And so we've had so many successes over the years.
I want to jump to Kevin and Chris, but I just want to highlight a couple of things that you said that are kind of critical, because you mentioned the 2001 bill was sort of like compete with Canada, but the whole concept was back in the late 90s and early 2000s was the runaway production. Everyone, whether it was New York or California, that production wasn't running away, and they weren't necessarily running away, but they were looking for places to go where, whether there were just incentives to supplement costs or just lower costs in general. So, here we are now in 2021. So, 20 years later, with over 36 states with incentives and, close to 60 countries now, really sort of competing quite aggressively, our business to them. And we'll talk more about this later, but these are, film and TV production is labor intensive. Any budgets that I've seen, the budget is in, and Kevin and Chris can probably agree and maybe even add to it, but typically your labor cost in any budget is 50 to 60, 65% of the costs. So clearly those costs then, get paid to the crew and the cast, and they again to spend locally, and goes back to Secretary Mueller's comment in terms of that multiplier. But going to Kevin and Chris, I just wanted to ask them as filmmakers, and especially, which we really haven't talked about, which is happening right now, and it's not just related to COVID, but there really is a content boom. I mean, you hear about Netflix spending $18 billion a year, and I mean, there's no slowing down right now of the need of content. I mean, if nothing else, COVID put everything on hold, but it also allowed the consumer to consume everything. So there really is this sort of starvation for content. So there's never a better time right now to invest in this industry, because this industry is not going away. But again, I tend to rattle on as Tava knows. But Kevin, Chris, just talk about, from your perspective, and we're going to talk more about this, but when you're thinking about production, what elements are important to you when you think about where to go? Obviously incentives, but I'll let you talk about the things that are really important to you, to both of you.
Yeah, I can chime in here. I'll go back to the beginning of I Can Only Imagine, and that movie. It was down to, in my mind, Louisiana and Oklahoma. Didn't know anybody in Oklahoma, and so we kind of scouted both locations. And then immediately, when I reached out to Tava or our line producer did, if she hadn't been so proactive and really getting back to us with information and data. And then to be honest, having the amount of the incentive available that we actually needed to pull the trigger and say, you know what, we're going to shoot that movie there. And for that movie, that was not a studio finance movie. Myself and John Irwin, my partner, went out and raised the production financing, 100% of it, as well as actually the P&A for it, not knowing if it was going to have a theatrical release or not. But since we raised the P&A, that kind of ensured that it probably would. And so, it was $8 million was the production budget, and we shot it in Oklahoma. And when you're doing a movie independently and you raise the money independently, and you're doing loans or investments from family members and friends and everybody that you can, guess what? Your fees are not much. And so a lot of that money went right into the state of Oklahoma with the crews that we hired and the local people. And we filled that in if there weren't availability. But literally, I mean, if there was an area that on that movie that Oklahoma had it, I wanted to hire it because I didn't have the money to be able to fly people in. And so the incentive was so important for us, having never shot there before. Obviously the landscape fit because part of the origin was actually the real story was in Oklahoma. But without that incentive, we couldn't have shot the movie. I mean, there's no way. We'd have to go raise more money, and then the movie's delayed, and timing is everything. When you're making a movie and then releasing a movie, and that movie was just released at the perfect time for it to do what it did, over 84 million at the box office is just incredible for an independent film that is, self-financed basically. Without Oklahoma, we're not able to pull that off. And so when we had our subsequent productions, of course, we ended up developing, creating Kingdom Story Company, and then doing a first look deal with Lionsgate. And we did one film in Alabama just because the location was California. It was hard to kind of cheat California and Oklahoma, but in Lower Alabama we could. But then we came right back to Oklahoma with the two films that we've got, and shot them back to back, which I had never done before. But again, with the relationships that we had with Teva and the film incentive, we were able to pull it off. And in the midst of a pandemic, which is one thing, but also a snowstorm, unlike we've ever seen before. And so the challenges were great, but the support that we had in Oklahoma goes a long way. And so that goes into the factors that we make as far as the where to shoot specific films. And like you said, once we wrapped those two productions, Lionsgate came back to us and said, go get us 3 more. And I'm like, what? And so we can't create the content fast enough is the deal. And so we're going to come out of this chasm, right, where there's this kind of desert period. And if people have deals with studios, they're being told, go create more content as fast as you can. So I think, with my opinion at least, is if Oklahoma can get out ahead of that and be really competitive with some of those bigger states, man, people are going to come. Because the experience from my end has been so positive as well. And people talk in this town and in the community at least, and good experiences go a long way.
Well, congratulations, Kevin. And Chris, I want to get your comments, but I just want to go back to something you said, Kevin, because again, going back to what Teva said and one of the projects, American Gods, I remember working with her and with producers at the time. And, that story is basically sort of an American travelogue in terms of different locations throughout the country. And I remember bringing Teva and her office together with the producers, and they really came back really quickly with this sort of picture book, started capturing the different looks and feels that Oklahoma could provide. So one of the things I always say to producers and also to states and countries is not what people think you are, but what you can look like on film. And so has such diverse locations and looks. I guess they probably can't really accomplish is water, which is probably why Alabama became important for California.
Yeah, we had to have the beach, and so that was the only thing that you didn't have. But when we scouted Imagine, we literally drove the entire state, and just because that's what crazy filmmakers do. But we couldn't believe the diversity, from the stuff in the western part, the Panhandle, all the way to the east and south, and there's a lot there in Oklahoma to be able to kind of mine from creatively to go shoot. It's not just one look, that is for sure. So I mean, I'm excited about coming back. I'm certainly I'm in supportive of whatever incentive and the future of that is. But the crews are great and love the people, and obviously the leadership there in the film department and at the higher levels of the government have been fantastic and very supportive of us. So
can I say something about the water, Joe?
Yes, please.
Oklahoma has more shoreline than both coasts combined. Imagine that. That is true.
Lakes.
They might be lakes, man-made
That is
bodies of
true, that
water,
is true.
but it is a true fact. And we have more mileage of Route 66 than any other state as well.
These are things we got to keep. These are things we got to continue to promote, Tava. We got to put that
Yes.
out.
It's
So
happening.
Chris, as somebody who lives in the state and has worked in the state in this industry for a while, maybe you can give us your perspective in terms of the trajectory, in terms of where you began in the industry and how you've seen it change.
Well, I tell you, yeah, I do feel like I'm the one of these things is not like the other on this panel. I am the working stiff here in Oklahoma. And thank you, Kevin, for bringing your 2 movies. If you're doing 3 more, don't forget my number, please. Yeah, I'm a casting director here and started in 2004 when the industry was just kind of building up, and we'd work on 1 or 2, maybe 3 movies a year. I think last year we did 15 or 16 films.
33.
Well, my office.
Oh, sorry.
Maybe more.
This is turn, Tava.
Sorry.
No,
All right,
no.
Shoreline.
Of course,
No,
30 is better than 16.
Yeah, true. We're on films now. In fact, I'm in a production trailer right now on set. I've just seen it blow up like crazy. It was me and some interns back in the day. We have a department of 9 full-time people right now working. We did a TV show. We're on this movie now. Reservation Dogs for Hulu and FX starts August 9th, I believe. We can talk about that. And some other things that are still filming and other things that have just wrapped. We worked on Kevin's 2 films back to back during the ice storm and the windstorm and all that. But typically Oklahoma is a great place to shoot. But yeah, I've seen amazing growth in opened in 2004. Is that right? Yeah. And then 2009, I opened an acting studio called the Actor Factory. The point of that was, is there crew base? Is there crew base? Couldn't really do anything about a crew base, but we wanted to raise the talent base around here, grow the talent base. So we've got a little studio that teaches on-camera acting and helps build the talent base around here. And we see people around here employed on sets even today that have come through the training. So it's been amazing watching it grow. I'm so thankful for 608. Hopefully it's, we're going to see a lot more coming.
It's interesting. One of the things that Tava said is part of her due diligence for getting to this point is looking at other states like Georgia. And besides having, an extraordinarily generous program, one of the things that Georgia did under Governor Deal is really, from the governor's office perspective, set up in-state training to basically train the residents to be on the crew. And I did a webinar a few months ago on Georgia, and I had learned that when there's productions happening in Georgia, 70 to 80% of the crew, if not higher, are Georgia residents. So, I'm sure that's what Secretary Mueller and Tava are going to be continuing to do, is help, along with yourself, Chris, is continue to build that in-state crew base, which is critical for the overall economic impact of the program. So I want to jump back to Secretary Mueller for a second and just ask him, because we talked about production boom and how there's going to be a lot more production, extreme amount of production for the next 10 years or more. But I mentioned COVID-19 and, the need for economic recovery and jobs due to that. And I wanted to ask you, how did Oklahoma, with the support of the governor, deal with film and TV production during the peaks of COVID-19?
Well, maybe it's a 2-part answer, I think, or one and a subpart maybe. But, one, I think Oklahoma in general, and you're right, it really was leadership from Governor Stitt, was and remains open for business. And so we had a shorter shutdown, sort of industry-wide, regardless of business, than most states. And that was by choice. We thought and continue to think that people's safety and well-being includes their economic wellness and well-being. And that's a factor that's an important one in this. And so I think Oklahoma was quick to reopen. And then I would say beyond that, it was important to certain productions, but I think in general as well, that the governor deemed the film and music industries, essential industries, so that production could continue and they'd be protected to remain in business for that. And I think that's true. We're giving the credit to Governor Stitt here. I think he deserves that, but I think we should recognize that Oklahoma's leadership, broadly defined, including the state legislature, it's a very business-friendly approach where businesses and job creators are championed. And that's the kind of responsiveness you see here. And so I think that's a very tangible example of that philosophy in action.
You know, it's interesting. I remember talking to Tava back, and she'll probably remember this, back in either late April or early May when, you know, production was literally shut down in Los Angeles, New York, Georgia, all this sort of what you would call the popular hubs. And I said, you know, Tava, there's a huge opportunity here because I'm talking to clients and they're all looking for safe places to go where it's not densely populated, where the virus isn't maybe as extreme. And so, you know, I she sort of took that and ran with it and really ran it and reached out to a lot of producers. So, you know, you think about the decision tree where before it was like incentives, crew, infrastructure. I think COVID sort of changed that that decision tree a little bit. And luckily, COVID is pretty close to being behind us. Knock on wood. So yeah, there's so much more opportunity. Kevin, is this something?
And I just want to yeah. Oh yeah. I think we're on the same path. Is that it was Kingdom Story and Lionsgate who first contacted me and said, what can we do about this? You know, we don't want to be shut down for business. And so is that where you were going, Kevin?
Yeah, no, just to echo Scott's comment, I mean, really the governor's decision to make filmmakers, filmmaking and those employees as essential business, without that, I don't think we get either movie off the ground in the state of COVID. I don't think it was possible. And so just the leadership at the top to be able to help us guide that through and get our two productions. I mean, look, when we first started talking in August, I don't think there were hardly any studio movie. I mean, nobody was talking about making a movie back last August. And so it was trying to get forward thinking and try and, you know, be out in front of everybody to be able to do it. And now, of course, filmmaking is, you know, everybody kind of followed Oklahoma's lead across the country, and filmmaking is kind of ramping up again quite heavily, actually, in various parts of the U.S. But I applaud.
Very heavily. I mean, breaking records in terms of the volume of production.
Right. But I applaud Oklahoma for their forward thinking and their leadership and the vision to be able to do that back in last August, because a lot of people saw that. Lionsgate saw it. They're like, wait, you know, people talk, right? So way to go to be able to do that and survive that and get some important productions, not just R2, but also obviously Killer's Flower Moon. What a great grab for you guys too. So yeah, way to go.
Thanks for giving us a reason to be visionaries, Kevin.
So Taylor, I want to sort of jump to the real stars here, which is obviously Senate Bill 608, which we already said was designed to further grow the local workforce, but also our co-authors of the bill, Senator Hall and Representative Fetgetter. So I just want to ask them both, maybe talk a bit about the legislative process for getting the Senate bill in front of the governor for his signature. So sort of when did you get involved, and sort of how did you get it from A to B?
Well, Joe, I'll go ahead and kick it off. By the way, congratulations on being able to say Tava's last name correctly. That's most impressive. Also want to thank Secretary and Commerce for everything they did. I think you're going to see a wonderful partnership. So just to give you a little bit of history, I've been in the legislature. I just completed my third full year. So I was elected back in 2018, which we were really starting to hear the need for making some adjustments in our incentive program for film. I was a little bit either lucky or unlucky, depending on how you look at it. I kind of fell under the tutelage of Appropriations Chair Roger Thompson, who took the trips out to California and made the contacts and really started the groundswell of the necessity to improve our program. When I came on board, he pretty much gave me a file that was about this thick. And he said, here, this is your baby now, go to work on it. I didn't hardly know a soul. So I actually began to talk to a lot of industry people. We have some really good ones that have have chosen to come back to Oklahoma. They were raised here, born here, worked here for a period of time, and they came back. They saw the value in the state. And so I got to spend a little bit of time with them, kind of understanding the industry. Tava is a tremendous representative of film and music here in Oklahoma. Sometimes she's just even a little over the top. We got to kind of rein her in.
No, not really.
He's truly amazing. And so I spent a lot of hours with her trying to understand the economics of film and music and where it can take us as a state. And then finally, and I'll let Representative Fettgetter, kind of fill in the blanks. I needed a House author, and Representative Fettgetter was willing and able. He's familiar with the industry. He's got a production going on in his district, so it's really a good fit for both of us. He had a production going on in his district. I represent Tava. I'm going to go ahead and label it as the film capital of Oklahoma in Guthrie. Where a lot of these films are originating, and as you all were popping off these names in the great movies in Oklahoma, just in the recent year, we've seen Stillwater produced in the area. We've seen Reagan produced in the area. Certainly, we can't go back. We got to go back to Rain Man, right? Which Guthrie really got its start and its first look at what we could be for Oklahoma film. So. That's kind of where it started with me. I let Representative Fettgetter kind of fill in the blanks, and we can talk a little bit more later on how the bill became law. It was quite a process. It was exciting, but a little fearful at times. But we were able to pull it off. So we can talk a little more about that in just a few minutes.
Great.
Yeah, thank you, Senator, and thank you to the panel and the Secretary and Tava, everybody, for all your efforts helping us get this across the line. I came into the legislature. I'm in my 5th year serving in the House and chairing the Finance Committee. All tax and revenue policy comes through my committee typically. So I work a lot on the economic development side of things. When I decided to get into the legislature, I had one sole focus. There's a lot of spokes in the wheel when it comes to the legislature, and whether it's somebody's focused on healthcare or education or whatever. I really try to focus my efforts on economic development, economic diversification, and growth in the state of Oklahoma. And we've done some things over the past years. When I came into the legislature, we weren't even putting money in the governor's quick action closing fund. So I took that on as my first initiative to get the legislature to start making sure that we put dollars into the quick action closing fund so that we could help the governor when it comes to attracting business at Oklahoma. We extended the aerospace tax credit out, from a 4-year sunset to an 8-year sunset, which took that industry literally overnight to our 2nd largest economic producer in the state over agriculture. We worked on automotive manufacturing, and film is always something that interested me, but Representative Dunnington in the House was kind of the lead on that. And so I would just kind of work with him, just try to understand it. And Chairman Wallace, and then of course Senator Thompson over in the Senate. And so we were a few weeks into session. Senator Hall and I had 608. We were co-authored on that bill already. And Chairman Wallace called me in his office and said, look, it's a Senate priority to get film and have a new program. So I need you to go work with Senator Hall, and you guys need to create a new film incentive for the state of Oklahoma. And I need it by Tuesday. I believe he told me on Thursday. And so I took a crash course in film, and I told him, I'd have it to him by Friday. I had to have some realistic time frame. And so for the next week, I spent, every waking hour trying to understand the industry and the economics of it, and, what was going on. Of course, we had the Reservation Dogs that was, being filmed currently in my hometown. And so I had access and some understanding. And I grew up in the entertainment world. I played music professionally for 30 years of my life. So I kind of had an understanding of, just, entertainment industry as a whole. And I looked at the film opportunity as a great way to help diversify the economy. In fact, a lot of times people, as we went through this process, they would ask me, why don't we just lift the cap? I mean, the motivation on the House side, at least I could speak for the film industry, was actually became quite a groundswell there of people that were interested, especially in the faith-based and family-based film and those types of things. So we ended up having a lot of support. People would ask me, well, why don't we just lift the cap altogether? And I told them, well, we have to build out the infrastructure. We have to build out the workforce. And so, those, whenever I was going through the process of, that 1 week of Crash Course in Film, I was focusing my time on how do we grow infrastructure? How do we grow the workforce so that, if it and when at some time we raise the cap again, or we lift the cap, or we become, or the senator and I come up with a new creative way that maybe people hadn't even thought about. How do we make sure that we can handle here in the state the productions that would come to the state. So it was an interesting few weeks to get to that point. And then, every time I turned around, the Senate Bill 608 was being held up here or being held up there in negotiations. And I was just having to fight on my side to, let everybody know that, hey, it's not just Senator Thompson's and Senator Hall's, priority. It's a priority to me as well in the House. And as your colleague, I need your support as well. So that's kind of how it went down.
No, that's amazing. I still want to ask you and also Senator Hall, again, obviously economic diversity was sort of a key factor, but were there some direct benefits that you were thinking of how film and TV industry could have sort of empowered you to triple the funding for the incentive? Was there anything specific that you were, obviously jobs, but I was wondering, in your thought process, anything else that we might not be thinking about?
Well,
when I look at, over the past 6 years or past 4.5 years in the legislature, the one thing that everybody loves to talk about is this free market concept. And, the reality of it is the free market does not exist the way historically we look at it. People don't come to Oklahoma because we have beautiful trees and, lots of lakes and, a lot of cattle and agriculture and those things. And we're just great people all together. They don't come here for that. They come here if we're competitive. And so a lot of times, on my side of the rotunda, I get pushback from colleagues, about incentivizing industry. They don't look at that as a free market principle, but the reality of it is, if you want to compete, you have to have these incentives. So I wanted to see what New Mexico had and Georgia had, and all these other states. What were they doing to incentivize, and how can we just make ours edge them out a little bit? Because if you can edge them out, then people start looking at the trees and the geography and the people and those things. And so, I just felt like it was, when Senator Hall, he probably laughed when I say this, when I first came to him, I said, hey, look, we're going to ask for $75 million. And I saw the look on his face, and I said, we're going to go big or go home, kind of the way I was looking at it.
I love that.
well,
I want to give Tava and Secretary Mueller a chance to talk more about the specifics of the bill, but there's one other thing, and also I think Senator Hall, you had something you wanted to add, but one thing I think is important that I think that is built into this is that it's going to impact not just the production hubs or the known production hubs like Oklahoma City, but other communities are going to benefit from it, which is important. I see that in other states. When people think of the New York incentive, they think it's only incentivizing New York City. And so that state did things to incentivize people to leave the city and go further upstate, and other states are doing that. So So maybe, I don't know if it's you, Representative Fettgetter or Senator Hall, to talk about how this bill will ensure that other communities will be impacted positively.
Sure. Well, what I wanted to do, and I think Representative Fettgetter will agree, I mean, we wanted to create an Oklahoma plan. We looked at Georgia, we looked at New Mexico, we looked at California, we looked at all the, but we wanted to create an Oklahoma plan. And I think we did that. We were really wanted to encourage the development of a long-term workforce that would be here. I know it was important to develop a crew size. At the time, we barely could piece together one full-time crew in the state of Oklahoma, and I think our goal is to have multiple crews that are available and trained and ready to go, that have served in other productions and would be picked up at a moment's notice. So in development of the Oklahoma plan, Oklahoma is predominantly rural, and Representative Fettgetter and myself both represent rural constituencies. And so it was important that we put the word forth that you can film and take advantage of the rebate program, and in fact, additional upticks if you'll look to rural Oklahoma. And so in the bill, we encourage, incentivize the use of producing in counties of 250,000 or less. Which is all but 3 counties in the state of Oklahoma are under 250,000 or less. We also give an additional incentive for you to produce or film inside a municipality of 13,000 or less. So that was really a way that we could get the attention of our rural legislators, that we're encouraging them to be in rural Oklahoma. And frankly, it's a good place to be. If you're a production company and you're working on a tight budget, what you can get for your money in rural Oklahoma is dramatically more efficient than what you get in a Tulsa or an Oklahoma City. So the cost of putting a crew up in a hotel or eating food or having catering or whatever it may be is going to be dramatically less. And so you've got you got the cost savings with being in a rural community, and then you got the added incentive that the Film in Oklahoma Act of 2021 creates for being in a rural community put together is really an encouragement for Oklahoma. And just so Tava knows, I've been paying attention all these years. She talks a lot about Oklahoma having 12 unique ecosystems. Which is very true. And most of those can be found outside the metropolitan areas in the state of Oklahoma. So it's just a good fit all the way around. And we've been able to incentivize rural Oklahoma and encourage. I mean, Killers is being done in one of the most remote areas in all of Oklahoma. It's beautiful. And I know that they're going to be happy with the product once it's complete.
Great. So Tava, maybe what you can do is give us a deeper dive into the bill in terms of what it takes to qualify for some of these upticks, and then just the overall overview of the program. And then maybe Secretary Mueller could just talk about from his office's, I guess both of your offices' perspective, some of your plans to continue to stimulate the local commerce and businesses.
Sure. Yeah. So we've been teasing this program, Filmed in Oklahoma Act of 2021, and now you get to hear exactly what we're talking about. So I'll break it down. Basically, the Oklahoma new film incentive, it remains a cash rebate, and it is a completely new program stood up. So the old Compete with Canada Act just goes to sleep when it sunsets after 2027, after all those 50 plus projects that are wrapping up and getting their accounting, all their paperwork done. That will just go to sleep in 2027. But the new program will incentivize, as we're saying, it will incentivize more workforce and infrastructure and community development around the state. So before we had a baseline of 35%, what they have done on this one is, I think, genius. So we dropped the baseline to 20%, which is still incredibly competitive around the state. If you look, around the country, if you look, 20% base rate, again, cash incentive. So that's an added value, I think. It's not a tax credit. 60-day turnaround on the back end.
I just want to just to give the audience perspective, because really means to be 20% cash. You know, so if you're dealing with a tax credit, there's two types. There's transferable and there's refundable. A transferable is something you're going to need to sell, and you're going to get something less than what the actual credit is. So for example, Georgia's 30%. If it sells at 85%, you're netting, I'm sorry, I can't do math in my head, but something's a little bit north of 25%. And then with the refundable credit, you've got a longer tail in terms of when the money comes back, because you got to file a tax return. That tax return is due on the statutory due date. So that means it could take anywhere from 18 months to 2 years before the cash comes back. So not only is 20% as a starting point competitive, it's also very very quick to monetize at full value.
Right. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. And we're known for the cash incentive. It works really well for the state, evidently. And so you can qualify for that base rate. The eligibility requirements are you have to have a minimum budget of $50,000, be able to show our office who administers the program your proof of funding, proof of insurance. Those are very important. Once the program opens, we'll talk about when that's going to happen. Then we help you onboard. And if you can qualify for up to 38% from that 20% baseline. And how we do that is we're incentivizing you, encouraging you to spend money. To Senator Hall's point, in rural Oklahoma, you can get either a 2% or up to 5% addition to the 20% baseline. If you choose to do post here, which includes your music, your color correction, all of those things under post, and there's minimum thresholds for each of these buckets that I'll talk about. So you can visit our website for the admin rules in early July. But if you can commit to doing post here, we want your long-term business. And I think that's really ultimately the sounding message here is we'll give you a bonus of 3% on top of that. And then if you film in one of our certified sound stages, you can get an automatic 5%. And then if you're either TV series or film, TV series can qualify for up to 5%. And Kevin, for your 3-picture deal, you can automatically qualify for a 5% uptick on your baseline. So again, 20% base up to 38%. And that's the program. We are finalizing administrative rules once the governor signs them. When he signs them right after July 1, when the bill becomes effective, then we will open the queue, and we already have a wait list of over 50. So come one, come all. We are very excited about bringing in some new business here in Oklahoma. So all of that will be on our website in early July. So that's the program.
One question I get a lot, and not specific to Oklahoma, in terms of the new funding, because you mentioned the wait list, is it a rolling cap? So is there funding limited to 1 year and you have to wait to the next year? But if you exceed the cap in 1 year, can you tap into the future year's funding? Because I know that's important, especially for TV that wants to know that they're going to be able to get that continuity of the benefit.
So you're correct. The reason, because of our rolling cap, sort of got us to where we were this past year. So we've got some measures in place to prevent from, just pre-qualifying the next 10 years of the program, which, by the way, it will sunset in 10 years. And so so for example, if you're TV or if you have a 3-picture deal like Kevin, you have to do 3 pictures within 3 years. The state will work with you on making sure that those monies in subsequent years are earmarked for you. But technically, we want to just pre-qualify that 30 million, right? And then we can start pre-qualifying the next 30 million as we get closer based on our application window. But we're going to really monitor this closely and be strategic in the projects that are coming. We're definitely, again, looking for that long-term business. I mean, everything that you see here, it's really pointing in that direction of, multiple pictures, multiple TV series, multiple seasons, stay here and do post, because we can assure you, I think everyone here can assure you that once you get to Oklahoma, you don't want to leave. We're already talking I'll kick it to Secretary Mueller, because I just attended my first recruitment meeting this morning with Jennifer Springer and her team, and I am so excited. There's so many new opportunities for us to work to help companies like Chris Freihofer, and there's so many companies here that have been working so hard to help them expand, to help bring Kingdom Story to Oklahoma. We've been talking to them about that. There's just, right, Secretary Mueller, there's so many different pathways to bringing in more business and expanding what we've got.
I'm glad you're segueing to Secretary Mueller, because I was just going to ask him, sort of now with this new program in place, sort of what are the plans to really further stimulate? And I know there's going to be other panels about stages and crew development, but maybe the Secretary could talk more about that and other things that we're not even thinking about, but excited to hear about.
Well, you all have largely hit on it, and I think philosophically, one of the things that's important to me, and I think important to the Department of Commerce, is that an intelligently and structured incentive is one that incentivizes partnerships between the state and those who are doing business here. And so something where someone can kind of parachute in, get a cash rebate, and parachute back out is less helpful. It still has the multiplier effect, but it's less helpful than the long-term partnerships that we really want to strike. And so I think where this bill was very cleverly structured are the incremental incentives to use Oklahoma's infrastructure, which by its very definition then leads to incremental investment in Oklahoma's infrastructure, and incremental investment leads to a well-trained, diversified workforce familiar with that infrastructure. And so you get a virtuous circle when structured properly. And I think this bill does that. And then I'll just reiterate what the others have said, that, kind of a thesis of mine for the Department of Commerce has consistently been, and I often have a printed chart that I show people that actually shows Oklahoma's population growth as a state since 1985, which is largely up and to the right. When you look at Oklahoma City and Tulsa, there's only 4 lines on it. Oklahoma City and Tulsa are above that median state population growth. And what that tells you is the other 75 counties are more or less flat over that period. And that's not unique to Oklahoma. That's true for much of rural America. But it emphasizes to me, and it's why I carry it around, the importance of also doing things to incentivize job opportunities and growth and opportunities for economic development, each of which strengthens families in the other 75 counties is kind of the way I say it. The two that don't, obviously the others that don't include Oklahoma City and Tulsa. And so I think this bill really does all of those things, and people will come here and I think partner with those long-term infrastructure investments that have now been made and are continuing to be made in Oklahoma. And over time, find out what others have said. I'm not from Oklahoma myself, nor is my wife. We're here by choice because it's a great place to live and a great place to raise a family. And I think other people, as they move here and do business here and see about the quality of the people and the quality of the workforce, the cost of living, and all of that value proposition that presents itself, it's a very attractive place to live, do business, and raise a family. And I think this particular bill is structured very intelligently. Our whole deal is driving value for Oklahoma's taxpayers. And I think this does this while incentivizing people to come here and do business in Oklahoma and hire Oklahomans. So that's kind of my philosophical view on it in many ways. And then specific to the workforce, maybe too, you mentioned that, Joe, in addition to the investment in infrastructure, which is really market-led. This incentive is designed to drive demand. If there's sufficient demand, the market will provide the infrastructure, and that's happening with things like Prairie Surf and others. That same thing will happen and is happening with the workforce. And we've got very well-funded training programs statewide to help that workforce come together with folks like Chris and others, really advising that. And that's one of the beauties. It's one of the things I've learned about Oklahoma that I had no clue about prior to moving here, that the workforce training programs are looking to partner with private enterprise. That's the ultimate consumer of their product, right? As they produce employees who are capable and ready to go to work and want to go to work and are gritty, like I think a lot in Oklahoma are. And they're anxious to either have a company put equipment on their site, or they're anxious to, move a training program to a company's site to accommodate. And they really want it to be a collaborative process to train the workforce. And so, we're fortunate that folks like Kevin have come here and been the tip of the spear in some ways on that. But as that continues to evolve, I think you'll see the workforce. It's already a strength in my view, and you'll continue to see it improve in the years to come.
Well, thank you. I want to jump back to Kevin. I also want to point out one thing that I think we touched on, but the element of tourism, because, and I've said this to other states as well, is that, a film or TV production is really a commercial in perpetuity that will play around the world versus a billboard or a television commercial or a magazine article. I mean, this is a chance for the world to see everything that Oklahoma has to offer and come and visit, which again is a perfect segue to Kevin. For someone who's produced 3 pictures in Oklahoma, including Unbreakable Boy, American Underdog, the Kurt Warner story, how do you feel the Senate bill will further attract long-term business and as Tava hinted at, hopefully yours?
Yeah, no, I mean, from what I hear from it initially, I don't think you guys are going to have a problem attracting long-term business and filmmakers, especially with the cash rebate component of that. And from I'll just speak from my own experience on how I build budgets and the process that we go through. It's about the cash rebate aspect and being able to fully monetize everything that the rebate has to offer is something that I look for as we build the budget. So all those little lines that uptick it, we try to get as much as we can to be able to do that. And even if we have to adjust some things in the script to be able to do it, to make the numbers work so our budget comes into play, assuming that we have all the creative elements in line, that the story provides, are very important. So I'm excited about it. I think the new program is great. I love the fact that you created something new and you're allowing the other films to be able to sunset when they sunset. Word is going to travel fast when this gets out. And, the timing is right. And that's the thing. The timing is so critical, right? Because film production is booming and it's going to continue to boom. And I think your wait list is going to get longer, is my opinion. So I think it's a good step and good timing for you guys.
I'd like to add something if I could.
Please. No, please.
And Mr. Secretary, I appreciate the kind words of, the intelligence of the bill. I just got to say that this bill was created by industry. I'm not sure exactly how Senator Hall approached it, from his perspective at the beginning, but when the task was laid, in my hands, what I did was I had about 6 different groups of people that were from all different areas in the industry that were coming to me, wanting to have input. And so what I did was I called all of them together, and this is what I said: I need you to create a bill that you all agree on 100%. You cannot have any disagreement. None of you can fight against the bill or argue against the bill. I need you as industry, because you had post-production, you had soundstage, you had, all sorts of different groups. And they did that. They brought me a bill, and I told them, I said, you can't disagree on this bill. And then when you bring it to myself and the senator, we're going to take it and we're going to make it, what we think we can get across the finish line. And you can't argue and be against that either. And so the industry really created this bill, not necessarily myself and the senator. We had our input. We had to take things and move it around and take things out and put things in, because to his point, the senator's point, we wanted it to be an Oklahoma plan. And so there were some things that we did make changes, but I just have to commend the industry, because the industry came together unanimously in support of the bill moving forward, no matter what part of the industry you worked in. And so the intelligence, Mr. Secretary, and the bill came from the industry created the bill.
And I just want to echo that very briefly, and just say that when people say, like, why is all of this happening and how is this happening? private sector has really, I mean, the industry stakeholders has really stepped in to this, unlike we've ever seen before. And I think that's truly why, the needle has moved. The state can't, I can't advocate, the state can't build the program. It should be the industry. And so there were lots of sleepless nights and things. And so you're right. I mean, we don't have time to name everybody, but some really strong in industry stakeholders, and some of them are standing up new soundstage facilities, like the Prairie Surf Studios in the heart of Oklahoma City. It's the largest soundstage in the Midwest. There's a whole separate panel on that in this Dead Center Film Festival Zoom panel series. So please, if you have interest in learning about them, please go check that out. There's also a new soundstage that opened in the fall during the pandemic called Green Pasture Studios that also has the Oklahoma Film and TV Academy training arm. We've had a new film education institute open. There's been a lot of growth. You're going to hear from a lot of those people as a part of our additional Dead Center Zoom panel series. That was a mouthful, but since we can't touch on all of those things, I just wanted to sort of give a nod to the rest of the Dead Center series. And thank you, Representative Fettgetter. I fully agree. So grateful for our industry here statewide.
Well, we're close to running out of time, and I want to give Chris a chance to talk about what the bill means to him. But before, because I always have a before, I want to go back to Kevin and hear more about his release plans for Unbreakable Boy and American Underdog. Will it be released in theaters, streaming? Because I went to my first movie last night in 15 months. California is not quite as open as the rest of the country, and it was Cruella. And talking about commercial and perpetuity. And music. It was such a love letter to London and a love letter to music. So I'd love to hear more about Kevin's release plans for his next two projects.
Yeah, we're monitoring the marketplace literally every weekend. Certainly the numbers that Cruella and Quiet Place 2 did, when they opened up is absolutely encouraging. It's like the marketplace almost picked up where they left off. And so we're talking with Lionsgate daily. We delivered Unbreakable Boy to them. It tested off the charts, almost at the level of I Can Only Imagine, which is really, really fantastic. So we made a great picture in Oklahoma on that one. And we're going to release that one. I don't think we've announced the date yet, but it will be released in theaters. And you guys will hear about it once Lionsgate wants to put it out there. On Kurt Warner, American Underdog, that's going to be a big release. We're rapidly in post-production editing the picture together, and it'll be a big release. They'll announce the date soon, but I think it's going to be one of those premier release dates around a holiday, and you guys will hear about it. It's the movie's coming out great. The Irwins are so talented as directors, and I can't say enough how excited we are that both films are turning out to be, an 11 out of a 10, on the scale. And so, but you'll hear more about them as Lionsgate wants to release news and marketing about them. But the news is really good from my end. So
congratulations. So Chris, I know I keep teasing. We're going to go back to you, but now we are. Since we're talking about how the local sector was really instrumental in this new bill. What does this bill mean to you in your business, at least in terms of initial thoughts?
My gosh, I love working in film. I love getting to do it in Oklahoma. I've made a full-time career. It's for 17 years working on film production in Oklahoma. I've got to work with some of the biggest filmmakers in the world. We've got to work on Minari, that won an Academy Award earlier this year, shot in Tulsa or just outside of Tulsa. We have the Matt Damon film Stillwater that opens in theaters July 30th. I'm a kid in a candy store, and it's thanks to the hardworking efforts of, I'm really lucky being on this panel because I get to thank all of you for creating 608 and all of your work on the film industry in Oklahoma. And just 100 feet from me right now, there are dozens and dozens of full-time film crew and cast and extras, and who would join me in thanking you and happy to buy you around somewhere for everything you did for us. Because with what we were able to do with our previous incentive, I can't even imagine what's going to be able to happen with the incentive we have now. So who knows what that means, to answer your question, but it can only be good, right?
Chris, you're going to be very busy. That's my 2 cents for you. And having worked with you on 2 movies, you're going to be quite busy, my friend.
I'm happy to hear that, and so are my assistants.
I wanted to jump back to Senator Hall because I believe that we're running out of time. I mean, technically, we might already be out of time. There'll be a bit of an editing process, but I know there's an apprentice piece of the bill that I know that I'd love to have Senator Hall to talk more about.
Sure. There's actually 3 things that, to Tavis' point earlier on, that encourage, not one group or organization kind of gobbling up the entire incentive. But one neat thing that we did in this bill that Representative Fettger and I worked on so hard was create this apprentice program. I mean, you have to have apprentice on site with your working for production in order to even receive the 20%. And so the number of apprentices is predicated on the size of budget. So the larger the budget, the more apprentices are required. And of course, the reason for that is this is all about workforce development, and we want that workforce developed in Oklahoma. We want those crews lined up, trained, ready to go. And so the more apprentices we can get on site, the more they can build their resume, and the more they get called back to work on other productions. So I'm very, very pleased that we were able to make that happen. Additionally, we're requiring a certain percentage of the overall $30 million rebate program to be spent on smaller budget films. So we know that this is where a lot of the growth comes from, a lot of the opportunity. It's a break-in period for some of the up and comers in production, and so we're freeing up some dollars that must be spent on lower budget films. So those dollars will always be there and always be available. And then the final thing that I think is tremendous is, and I know I could see some shrugs about the 10-year sunset. 10 years comes pretty quick to all of us. I know that, raising kids. I woke up one morning, my kids were all grown. We're going to be taking a look, and it's required in this bill that an annual look at the program be taken, every 12 months. So every 12 months, a report will come out of the Department of Commerce, Mr. Secretary. I don't even know if you knew that, but congratulations, thanks. That will identify how the rebate program was used, the dollars that were put forth, and the economic impact associated with that. It'll also be kind of examined by our Legislative Office of Fiscal Transparency. So there's a requirement that report be submitted to what we call LOFT, that will take a deep dive into the value associated with the rebate program, with the goal being not that it will fail, that it will overly exceed our expectations. And if that happens, then it's more likely that Representative Fettger and I can go back in another year or two and say, hey, look, this has been a tremendous booming program for the state. And 30 million is not enough. And we start looking at that $75 million that I about had a heart attack over, becomes a real possibility when we have numbers that can prove up the value. So I'm excited about the way that program's drafted to require an annual look and encourage us to bump that up or extend the sunset depending on how successful the program is.
Well, I'm going to suggest that you keep your pencils sharp because I'm pretty sure that it's going to be successful. So those are great, really, really great points to highlight, all 3 of them, especially the apprenticeship, because this is an industry that really does sort of learn on the job. And so I lecture a lot at the local universities here, and I kind of joke that, in a lot of aspects, what you're learning here is great, but what you're really going to learn is when you are on a set. So that's really phenomenal. So thank you. So I think we're out of time. I just want to give everyone a chance in case we missed something. Is there anything else anyone wants to highlight that I didn't get a chance to ask?
I would just like to highlight that Senator Hall mentioned earlier, in his district, that was the #1 film area in the state. The hashtag OK Film also applies to that. Okay, applies to Okmulgee County. And so we're going to dethrone you there, Senator Hall, on that #1 film area in the state. We're going to bring us out to Tulsa.
Go Bulldogs.
That's right.
The only thing that I would add is for your viewers and listeners, around the country and around the world, if you come to Oklahoma, you're going to fall in love. You're going to want to stay. You're going to want to make an investment. You're going to find a workforce that is quality, and you'll find our state to receive your industry better than you've ever seen before.
Well, I just want to end this by thanking you, all my panelists. I want to thank the film and television production community in Oklahoma, the Dead Center Film Festival, all the spectators watching today. And I really can't thank you all enough. This really was an hour and 11 minutes flew by. So appreciate your time. And this has really been phenomenal. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. Thanks, everyone.